This is Block 9, The Liberal Establishment, Part 4, The Rise and Fall of Richard Nixon, with the Democratic Party splits. The Vietnam War, which we haven't quite gotten to yet, split the Democratic Party between supporters of that by 1968, by the presidential election of 1968, there was a massive anti-war campaign going on in the United States. Thousands of people, refused to be drafted, burned their draft cards, fled to Canada. Hundreds of thousands of people participated in protest marches, sit-ins, etc., etc., etc. And these disaffected people looked for a political outlet for their views and desires that the United States should pull out of the Vietnam War immediately. And they split the Democratic Party. That the Democratic Party was split between supporters of immediate withdrawal from Vietnam, who came to be known as doves, like the bird that's a symbol for peace, and those Democrats who supported staying in Vietnam until the Vietnamese could protect themselves from the communists, and those were the hawks. So you had the hawks and the doves. The hawks, the hawkish Democrats, proposed continuing the war and finding a negotiated settlement, and the doves proposed that enough Americans have died already, let's bring the troops home. Lyndon Johnson fell further and faster than almost any American president in history. From his overwhelming re-election in 1964 to his incredible successes in the Great Society, by 1968, President Johnson had fallen real fast. The lack of success in Vietnam and the economy slowing down made him very, very unpopular. He decided not to run again for president. He could have run in 1968, and Johnson chose not to. He had had enough. His hand-picked successor was the guy on the left, a guy by the name of Hubert Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey is going to be the Johnsonian Democrat, the Democrat who supports continuing the war until the North Vietnamese, the Communist Vietnamese, come to the negotiating table. That left half of the Democratic Party angry at Johnson's hand-picked successor. So two different candidates emerged that would go for the anti-war vote. The anti-war vote first turned to the guy on the bottom, Eugene McCarthy, a senator from the old isolationist state of Minnesota, nearly beat the president in the New Hampshire primary before the president decided to drop out. It was his defeat in the New Hampshire primary that actually kind of convinced him to drop out. So Eugene McCarthy kind of attracted the anti-war support at first. Then Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, the younger brother of the murdered president, he jumped into the race as well. He had similar charisma and charm as her older brother, and anti-war people, the youth vote, the black vote, the liberal vote, all started gravitating towards Kennedy. Humphrey retained kind of the white ethnic vote, the working class white vote of the Democratic Party. Johnson quit the race, so Johnson's out. Kennedy, in June of 1968, on the night he had won the California primary, was assassinated himself by a Palestinian Christian by the name of Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan Sirhan was upset at Kennedy's support for the State of Israel and decided that the best way to solve this problem was to murder him. That left only two candidates standing. That left Humphrey, the hawkish Democrat, the successor of Johnson, and Eugene McCarthy. We're going to battle it out for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. The fight went all the way to the convention. It went all the way to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968. It seemed that as powerful as the anti-war movement might have been, it still did not even make up half of the Democratic Party. And Humphrey managed to win more delegates to go to the convention. Knowing that the Democrats would probably nominate Humphrey, who wanted to continue the war, and the Republicans would nominate Nixon, who definitely wanted to continue the war, anti-war protesters descended on the Democratic National Convention in Chicago with fire in their bellies. by at least 100,000 protesters. Mayor Daley, the mayor of Chicago, he's a Democratic legend. His son runs Chicago now. It's pretty much been the same father and son running Chicago forever and ever and ever now. Turned the Democratic Convention Hall into a fortress, protecting the convention from the thousands upon thousands of protesters by police, and he even called out the National Guard. Inside the convention hall, it's kind of chaotic. Senator McCarthy, Eugene McCarthy, wanted his supporters to insert a plank into the Democratic platform calling for immediate peace, an immediate withdrawal from Vietnam. Humphrey and his allies outmaneuvered him on the convention floor. Once the protesters outside had heard that McCarthy's plank for an immediate peace had been rejected, the protests turned into a riot. They began to bait the police, calling them pig. They began taunting the soldiers with taunts of baby killer, shouting obscenities, destroying property, throwing bags of their own shit at the police and at the National Guardsmen. The police did not have the wherewithal to stay quiet. The police responded with plenty of force of their own, and it became a free-for-all on the streets of Chicago outside the Democratic National Committee. You can see some pictures. Here's Mayor Daley's police force kind of getting ready, the protesters, and then the riot. The riot is seen on national television live as police officers handcuffed the innocent right along with the guilty, used tear gas, had no problem using their billy clubs. It was an absolute embarrassment for the Democratic Party outside of their own convention in Chicago. Meanwhile, inside, Humphrey and his forces steamrolled McCarthy, and he was nominated on the first ballot. So in 1968, the Democrats would be running Johnson's hand-picked successor, a man who wants to continue his Great Society programs, and a man who wants to continue the war in Vietnam until a negotiated withdrawal that protects non-communist South Vietnam could be negotiated.